There's a $3 liquid sitting on a dusty shelf in almost every hardware store. You brush it onto old paint that has been peeling, faded, and lifeless for years. Paint that looks beyond saving. Paint that most people would scrape off, sand down, and completely redo. You apply a thin coat, you wait, and then something happens that doesn't make sense. The color deepens, the cracks disappear into the surface. The chalky, dry texture transforms into a smooth, rich finish. It doesn't look repaired. It looks new. Not repainted, not covered, not hidden, restored. Walls that looked 20 years old suddenly look like they were painted last week. Wooden doors regain their original tone. Faded fences come back to life as if time reversed itself. No sanding, no repainting, no expensive contractors. Just a $3 secret the paint industry quietly stepped away from. Because a solution that restores old paint in a single application does something dangerous. It eliminates the need to repaint. And if people stop repainting, an entire multi-billion-dollar industry starts to collapse. This is the story of the $3 secret that makes old paint look brand new. Welcome back! If this kind of knowledge matters to you, the subscribe button is not just a button. It's a way to keep information like this alive. Because what you're about to hear isn't new. It was discovered over a century ago, and then slowly forgotten. Not because it didn't work, but because it worked too well. The year was 1921. Not in a corporate lab, not inside a billion-dollar company, but in a small woodworking shop in northern Italy. A craftsman named Lorenzo Bianchi spent his days restoring old furniture. Not replacing it, restoring it. Chairs, cabinets, doors, window frames, pieces that had been exposed to sun, moisture, and time for decades. Back then, repainting wasn't always an option. Paint was expensive. Labor was slow, and skilled craftsmen were expected to preserve, not replace. Lorenzo noticed something strange. Some pieces of wood, even after years of wear, still had paint that hadn't fully failed. It was dry, faded and cracked, but it hadn't detached from the surface. The color was still there, just buried. Instead of stripping it off, Lorenzo started experimenting. He mixed natural oils used for wood treatment, linseed oil, small amounts of solvent, a blend that could penetrate surfaces instead of sitting on top. When he applied it to old painted wood, the effect was immediate. The oil soaked into the dried paint layers. It rehydrated the pigments. It filled microscopic cracks. It bonded loose particles back into place. The result looked impossible. Old paint didn't just improve. It revived. The color returned. The texture smoothed out. The entire surface regained depth and richness. Lorenzo wasn't creating something new. He was bringing something back. He refined the mixture over time, adjusting ratios, improving penetration, reducing residue. Soon, other craftsmen noticed. They started using similar blends. Furniture restorers across Europe quietly adopted the method. Not as a product, as a technique. Something passed from one professional to another. Never advertised, never mass-produced, because at the time there was no reason to. Then everything changed. By the mid-20th century, industrial paint production exploded. Large companies began manufacturing paints designed not to last forever, but to require maintenance. Repainting became normal, expected, even necessary. And with that shift, Lorenzo's method became a problem. A technique that could restore old paint meant fewer people buying new paint, fewer repainting jobs, less profit. So instead of being developed further, It slowly disappeared from public knowledge. Not erased, not banned, just ignored. Buried under a wave of new products promising better coverage, longer durability, and advanced protection. All of which had one thing in common. They required you to buy more. Again and again. Meanwhile, the original idea remained exactly where it started. Simple, cheap, and incredibly effective. Today, that same principle exists in modern form. Refined, bottled, and still overlooked. A penetrating oil-based restorer that costs less than $3 per application. Sitting quietly on store shelves while people spend hundreds repainting surfaces that never needed repainting in the first place. But to understand why this works so well, you need to understand what actually happens to paint over time, and why most solutions completely fail to fix it. Now here's the part most people completely misunderstand. Paint doesn't fail the way you think it does. It doesn't just go bad. It doesn't suddenly become useless. What actually happens is far more subtle and far more fixable. Over time, paint loses its oils. The binders that once held the pigment together begin to dry out. UV exposure from the sun breaks down the surface layer molecule by molecule. Moisture pulls essential compounds out of the paint film. And what you're left with is something that looks destroyed, but isn't. The pigment is still there. The structure is still there. Even the original color is still there. It's just been dehydrated, fractured, and flattened. Think of it like leather. When leather dries out, it cracks, fades, and loses flexibility. Most people assume it's ruined. But apply the right oil and suddenly it softens, darkens, and returns to life. Paint behaves in a surprisingly similar way. The problem is that almost every commercial solution ignores this. Let's look at what people usually do. They sand, they scrape, they repaint, or they buy paint refresh sprays that sit on top of the surface like a temporary mask. None of these actually restore anything. Sanding destroys what's left. Repainting covers the problem, but doesn't fix the underlying material. And surface sprays? They create a thin cosmetic layer that fades within weeks because they don't penetrate. They don't bond. They don't rebuild, they just sit there. And that's where the $3 secret changes everything. A proper paint restoration oil doesn't sit on top. It penetrates. At a microscopic level, the oil moves into the dried paint film. It fills the tiny cracks created by years of expansion and contraction. It resaturates the pigment particles that have lost their depth. It reintroduces flexibility into a surface that has become brittle. And most importantly, it restores how light interacts with the paint. This is the part almost nobody talks about. Faded paint doesn't just lose color, it loses the way it reflects light. The surface becomes rough on a microscopic scale. Instead of reflecting light evenly, it scatters it in every direction. That's what creates that dull, chalky look. When the oil fills those imperfections, the surface becomes smooth again. Light reflects properly. Color appears deeper, richer, more vibrant. Not because you added anything new, but because you restored what was already there. This is why the transformation feels so dramatic. It looks like repainting, but it's not. It's restoration. Now here's where things get uncomfortable for the industry. Because once you understand this, the entire repainting model starts to fall apart. The global paint and coatings market is worth over $180 billion. A massive portion of that comes from maintenance repainting. Not new construction, not new builds. Maintenance. People repainting surfaces that already have paint on them, every few years, over and over again. A single gallon of quality exterior paint can cost between $30 and $80. A full repainting project, hundreds, sometimes thousands. Labor, materials, time, all repeated on a cycle that most people never question. But here's the reality. A significant percentage of those repaint jobs could be delayed or completely avoided with a simple restoration step that costs less than $3. And that creates a problem, because a solution that extends the life of paint by years reduces product turnover, reduces repeat purchases, reduces demand. You don't need to repaint as often. You don't need as much paint. You don't need as many contractors. And suddenly, the economics don't work the same way anymore. So what happens? The same thing that always happens. Nothing. No bans. No warnings. No headlines. Just silence. The products exist. Paint restores. Penetrating oils. Conditioning solutions. But they're not front and center. They're not heavily advertised. They're not positioned as a replacement for repainting. They're positioned as a niche, a temporary fix, something optional, something minor. Meanwhile, repainting remains the default answer, because the default answer generates the most money. And just like with every other industry built on repeat purchases, the goal isn't to eliminate the problem. It's to manage it. Just enough to keep you coming back. Again, and again, and again. But once you see how simple the actual solution is, it's hard to unsee it. And that leads to the only question that really matters. If restoring old paint is this easy, why is nobody telling you to do it? So here's what you actually do. Go to any hardware store. Skip the paint aisle completely. Don't look at the bright cans promising maximum coverage or 10-year protection. You don't need them. Instead, go to the wood treatment or restoration section. Look for a penetrating oil. It may be labeled as wood restorer, teak oil, linseed oil blend, paint rejuvenator. Different names, same principle. A bottle costs between $5 and $15. But here's what matters. Each application costs around $2 to $3. That's your $3 secret. Take it home. Now, before you start, there are a few things you need to understand. This is not paint. You are not covering the surface. You are restoring it. That means preparation is simple, but important. First, clean the surface. Use water and a mild detergent. Remove dust, dirt, and loose debris. You don't need aggressive scrubbing. Just make sure the surface is free from anything that would block absorption. Let it dry completely. This step matters more than people think. Water trapped in the surface will prevent the oil from penetrating properly. Once it's dry, you're ready. Pour a small amount of the oil onto a cloth or sponge. Not too much. You don't need to soak it. Apply a thin, even layer across the painted surface. Work it in gently. You'll notice something almost immediately. The color begins to change, right in front of you. What looked faded starts to darken. What looked lifeless starts to gain depth. Keep spreading it evenly. Make sure you don't leave thick patches. This isn't about quantity. It's about penetration. Once the surface is covered, stop. Don't overwork it. Let the oil do what it was designed to do. Wait 10 to 20 minutes. During this time, the oil is moving into the paint film, filling microcracks, rehydrating pigments, restoring flexibility. After the waiting period, take a clean, dry cloth. Wipe off any excess oil from the surface. This step is critical. Anything left sitting on top will become sticky or attract dust. What you want is what's inside the paint, not on top of it. And then, look at the result. The difference is not subtle. It's dramatic. Faded fences look freshly painted. Old doors regain their original tone. Exterior siding that looked ready for replacement suddenly looks maintained. In many cases, one application is enough. For severely dried or sun-damaged surfaces, apply a second coat after a few hours. That's it. No sanding, no repainting, no contractors. Total time, under 30 minutes. Total cost, around $3. Now compare that to the alternative. Repainting a fence, $100 to $300 in materials. Hiring someone, $500 to $2,000 depending on size. Replacing wood panels because the paint failed, even more. And most of that could have been delayed for years, with a simple restoration step that almost nobody talks about. But here's where I need to be honest with you. This works incredibly well. But it's not magic. If paint is completely peeling off in large sections, if the surface has already detached from the material underneath, then yes, repainting is necessary. Restoration only works when the paint is still physically present. Dry, faded, aged, but still there. And that's the key difference. Most surfaces don't fail all at once. They fade slowly over time, which means most surfaces can be restored long before repainting becomes necessary. One more thing. This is still a chemical product. Treat it with respect. Wear gloves. Work in a ventilated area. Don't over-apply. Store it properly. Used correctly, it's one of the simplest and most effective restoration tools you'll ever use. Used carelessly, it can create more problems than it solves. Simple rules. Follow them, and you'll be fine. Now step back for a second and look at the bigger picture. Your grandparents didn't repaint everything every few years. They maintained what they had. They restored. They preserved. Then industries grew. Products multiplied. And slowly the idea of restoration was replaced with replacement. Not because restoration stopped working, but because replacement makes more money. A product that lasts longer reduces demand. A solution that fixes the problem reduces repeat sales. And a method that costs $3 instead of $300 doesn't fit very well into a system built on constant consumption. So it gets pushed aside. Not removed, not banned, just overlooked. Hidden in plain sight, sitting on a shelf, waiting for someone to notice. The science hasn't changed. The chemistry still works. The results are still immediate. The only thing that changed is how often people are told about it. If this opened your eyes, share it. Because every share brings this knowledge back into circulation. And every person who learns this is one less person wasting money on solutions designed to be temporary. The $3 secret was never gone. It was just quiet. And now you know where to find it.